There is a particular type of coaching mistake that tells you far more about a team than a blown defensive assignment or a failed halftime adjustment. It's the inability to recognize what's happening in real time and react accordingly. Every coaching staff enters a game with a plan. Rotations are mapped out, minutes are projected, and substitutions are scheduled for perfectly valid reasons such as matchups, conditioning, and foul management. But those plans are supposed to be guides, not unbreakable rules. Great coaches understand that basketball games are living, changing environments. When the action on the floor presents overwhelming evidence that the original plan should be altered, elite coaches adjust without hesitation because the scoreboard is the only thing that matters when the game ends. On Saturday against the Portland Fire, Stephanie White made a substitution at the 6:30 mark of the first quarter that is now permanently preserved in the game film. What happened afterward became one of the defining moments of the contest. More importantly, her explanation during the post-game press conference raised questions that extend far beyond a single rotation choice. Today we're breaking down the film, examining exactly what happened, and analyzing why the response afterward may carry even bigger implications than the decision itself. Let's start from the opening tip and build the timeline from the evidence available.
Chloe Peterson put this out about 20 minutes ago. Now this one little part right here, it says Stephanie White on Wiley of Boston and Caitlin Clark subbed out at the 6:30 mark of the first quarter, after which Portland went on a 13-2 run. This was the moment right here when this game got out of hand. In that first quarter, when they went on that 13-2 run, the Fever could not catch up. The gas was gone, the tires was flat, and the team...
Indiana could not have asked for a much better start. The Fever came out aggressive, pushing the pace, moving the ball effectively, and creating the kind of offensive flow that fans have been waiting to see all season. Within minutes they had built an 8-2 lead, and Portland looked overwhelmed by Indiana's energy and execution. Momentum was clearly on the Fever's side. Then came the decision that changed everything. At the 6:30 mark of the opening quarter, Stephanie White removed both Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston from the game at the same time. What followed was immediate and dramatic. Portland responded with a 13-2 run, completely flipping the momentum of the contest. The lead disappeared, the energy shifted, and the rhythm Indiana had established early suddenly vanished. From that point forward, the Fever never truly regained control. By the final buzzer, Portland had secured a convincing 100-84 victory. That sequence raises an unavoidable question. Given the way the game was unfolding, what information existed at that moment that justified taking both of Indiana's primary anchors off the floor simultaneously while the team was in the middle of building positive momentum?
And then after Portland took timeout, kind of just flipped the script. Just what changed either on their end or on your end?
I just thought they were the hungrier team. I thought that they played with a relentless effort, a relentless pursuit to get to what they wanted, to be disruptive on defense, to get to their spots on offense. I thought their competitive spirit was better than ours.
And Caitlin had 3 assists in the first 3 minutes of the game, then both her and Aaliyah checked out, I think, around the 6:30 mark. Then Portland went on a third.
That exact question was raised after the game by reporter Chloe Peterson, who laid out the timeline clearly and directly. Indiana jumped out to an 8-2 lead. Clark and Boston were removed. Portland immediately responded with a 13-2 run. What was the reasoning behind the move? Stephanie White's answer included 2 key points that deserve separate examination. First, she noted that Aaliyah Boston was operating under a minutes restriction. That explanation is understandable and tied to player health considerations that coaching staffs must respect. The second part of her response, however, is where the debate begins. White explained that the substitution followed the team's typical rotation pattern. On the surface, that may sound reasonable. But when viewed through the context of what was happening on the floor, it becomes far more difficult to defend. The Fever had momentum. Clark was helping drive the offense. Portland was struggling to respond. Yet instead of reacting to the conditions of the game, the decision appeared tied to a predetermined schedule. And that distinction is what transforms this from a simple substitution discussion into a much larger conversation about coaching philosophy and in-game decision-making.
For checking them out, or did either of them request a sub?
Well, AB's still on minutes restriction, so she's coming out. And typically that's around the same time that we've been taking Caitlin out before. We didn't in Golden State just because, quite honestly, we did Raven in that environment without another ball handler on the floor. So that's been our
Raven has to develop. Raven got to play. You got to put her out there. There is no Raven in that environment. Let her play. Ain't this why you drafted her?
typical substitution pattern.
And
Let's take a closer look at the explanation Stephanie White offered after the game. Her justification centered on what she described as the team's typical substitution pattern. On paper, that may sound harmless. But when you place that explanation against the actual circumstances unfolding on the court, the concerns become obvious. Indiana was leading 8-2. The offense was flowing. Caitlin Clark was helping orchestrate the pace, and Portland was struggling to find answers. Yet the decision wasn't based on what the game was showing in real time. It was based on a pre-planned schedule. That distinction matters because one of the fundamental principles of high-level coaching is understanding when to abandon the script. Rotation plans exist as guidelines, not commandments. When momentum is firmly on your side and your best players are driving success, the information coming from the floor should outweigh any predetermined timetable. Championship-level coaches make those adjustments instinctively because they recognize that preserving momentum often carries greater value than sticking rigidly to a plan. White's comments suggest that flexibility never entered the equation. The substitution wasn't driven by the game's competitive state, it was driven by routine. And if routine consistently takes priority over real-time evidence, then the same mistakes become likely to repeat themselves. The discussion surrounding Raven Johnson adds another layer to the issue. Developing players improve by facing difficult situations, not by being shielded from them. Growth happens under pressure. When opportunities are limited because the environment is considered too challenging, development can stall rather than accelerate.
At the press conference, and Stephanie White fails to take responsibility for her action. Now, when they asked her about this damn substitution, this is our, not this is my, not this is on me, this is our normal substitution. Where is the accountability as a coach? You're the commander-in-chief of this basketball team.
The language used during White's press conference may be just as revealing as the decisions themselves. Throughout her answers, there was a consistent reliance on collective language, phrases like "we" and "our typical substitution pattern." At first glance, that may seem insignificant, but leadership experts often pay close attention to how accountability is communicated. When a substitution directly impacts the flow of a game, the responsibility ultimately rests with the head coach. That's part of the job description. Yet the repeated use of collective phrasing can sometimes blur the line between shared organizational decisions and individual coaching choices. The distinction becomes especially important when discussing a sequence that immediately preceded a 13-2 run by the opposition. Accountability is not about assigning blame for every negative outcome. It's about clearly owning decisions and explaining the reasoning behind them. The same discussion applies to Indiana's defensive collapse. Portland scored 37 points in the third quarter, and White's explanation focused largely on player execution, slow rotations, foul trouble, and poor anticipation. While those factors certainly played a role, they represent only part of the picture. Defensive performance is influenced not only by execution but also by the structure of the system itself. When breakdowns occur repeatedly, it's fair to examine whether the scheme is placing players in difficult positions. Focusing exclusively on execution risks, overlooking the larger strategic factors that contribute to those breakdowns in the first place.
And this is the second straight game you guys have started struggling from three-point range. I think Thursday was you started 0-8 from three, and then tonight it was 0-9 before Sophie made a three-pointer late in the second quarter. Just how can you get that going earlier if there's a way to do that?
I don't think we shot the three ball particularly well all season. I think it's just reps. Our players are in the gym; they're getting reps. It's finding your teammate.
Indiana's struggles from three-point range provide another example of the difference between symptoms and causes. The Fever opened the game missing their first 9 attempts from beyond the arc before finally connecting later in the second quarter. White explained that many of those missed opportunities stemmed from poor pass timing, with shooters receiving the ball late and being forced to reset instead of catching in rhythm. That observation is accurate as far as it goes. But it only explains what happened at the end of the possession, not what caused the problem to develop. In modern basketball, late passes are often the result of disrupted spacing, contested passing lanes, and offensive actions that fail to generate clean opportunities. When passing windows close too quickly, ball handlers are forced into secondary reads, delaying the delivery and reducing shot quality. The solution isn't simply telling players to move the ball faster. The solution is creating offensive actions that generate clearer passing angles and more consistent spacing. Screening, off-ball movement, and coordinated action are what produce those clean looks. Without those elements, shooters are frequently placed in difficult situations before they ever receive the ball. In that sense, the late pass issue appears less like an isolated execution problem and more like a symptom of larger offensive design challenges that continue to affect the team.